It's out. It's out. It's finally out. Megaman Starforce Legacy Collection. And man, getting to relive some of my childhood memories has been a great time. We're not here to talk about that specifically. Having played through the 3 games, I've come to the realization that the combat system of this series is honestly more well thought out than I initially remembered. Following the highly successful Battle Network series, Starforce had some big shoes to fill, naturally facing some expectations, but what many fans wouldn't expect were the significant changes they would make to the combat system. Now, I wasn't around the internet when these games came out, so I can't say what the common consensus was. However, looking at old forums and reviews would suggest that, well, some fans and critics were, to say the least, unreceptive. Nonetheless, the combat system goes on a whole different direction. New look, new rules, and new mechanics. For this video, not only will we be taking a look at the combat system in these games, but we'll also compare them to Battle Network just so that we can get an idea of how they differ in design philosophies. To begin the breakdown and analysis, we first need to set up some ground rules. I will be mostly comparing Starforce 1 with the first Battle Network game, since they're both the starting points of their respective series. And to maintain a level of fairness, I'm not going to compare with the later entries until we start getting into specific stuff like the form changes and such. It took 6 games for Battle Network to reach that peak, and Starforce just kind of starts fresh. Like, comparing BN6 with SF1 just doesn't seem like the right way to approach this comparison to me. Right now, our focus is primarily on establishing the universal mechanics, how they differ from each other, and how does it fundamentally change the combat dynamic. I'm not gonna go in depth whenever I bring up Battle Network mechanics here. Been there, done that. Also, I'm not doing this comparison for the sake of determining which one is better. I'm mainly doing this because I like talking about both series. So I wanted to point out their differences and just have a discussion about it. Also, just for transparency's sake, I am using footage of both Starforce DX and the Legacy Collection. So if you guys see any inconsistencies in the gameplay, then that's why. Now, without further ado, let's bust some viruses. Let's begin with the first thing we see, the battlefield. It places you on a 3x5 grid with the camera behind your back. Immediately in your field of view, you see the enemies having control of all of this space, while you're stuck in these 3 tiles. You're only limited to moving around left and right, so you don't have to think much about your positioning, and there's a reason for that. We'll expand on that later. A very stark difference from Battle Network having its camera in a 2D perspective. They gave you more space to move around in, and it was something that you or your enemy could control with the right attacks. I might be reading too deep into this, but I interpret this as you in the role of the operator, or in this case, Lan, having an Eagles type view that gives Megaman.exe accurate information of his surroundings while he is focused on the battle. In Starforce, the camera is a lot closer to Megaman, with the story being so character driven, it's like they wanted you to be in Geo's shoes and more connected to his character. This confined space might raise some concerns to the player. If they're restricted to just the space, how are close range attacks going to be effective? Do you just wait till the enemy gets close? One thing is for sure, there's less attention required on the battlefield itself and more on what the enemy is doing. And while it's not commonly seen, there are chances of debris getting in your way or attacks that can change the terrain. At first glance, it may seem like your limited movement would make dealing with hazards like poison tiles tricky to deal with. At least that's what I would say if you weren't freely given abilities to circumvent a lot of these nuisances. It does seem like the removal of space was just a result of Capcom solely wanting to simplify the gameplay, and that was certainly a key factor, but I think there's more to it than that. For now though, let's move on to the next thing we see, the custom screen. Visually, it's very dull in comparison to Battle Network. It had its own little eye-catching layout that fit well with its visual identity. Despite their efforts to take advantage of the DS hardware to bring a more practical custom screen, I believe they could have created a more visually interesting interface. Regardless, it gets the job done. Here you're presented with a number of cards that come from your folder, signifying that you get a max amount of 6 cards per round. They are placed in a 3x2 screen and... hold on. Where are the codes? Battle cards work quite differently. They don't have codes ingrained into them. You're only able to select multiple cards if they are in the same row or if there's a duplicate of the card you selected. Battle cards that have white lines are dubbed white cards, and they can be used with any card, regardless of its spot. Basically, it's the start code. Battle Network had ways to add extra chips, sometimes at the expense of a turn or a program. The mechanic gave the player an option in case of a bad code combination. For the most part, that just made the battles go at a slower pace. Because of the removal of codes, you are consistently given basic options per turn. Luck still plays a factor, but a less organized folder now incurs a smaller penalty. Speaking of folders, the maximum amount of cards you can choose is 30. However, folders can have more than 30 battle cards, and it's all tied to a mechanic called the Brother Band system. To simply explain it, it's like a friend list that directly ties into your abilities. As you play through the story, you will eventually register characters as your brothers. It has a bigger significance in the story, but we're not going to cover that in this video. You can also register register other Starforce players as your brothers. You get abilities as well as able to use battle cards from your brother's favorite selection. The card that you get, however, is random, but to offset this arbitrary element, they become white cards. I'm not a fan of how abilities were handled in this game in particular. There's not many of them, and you're not given as much freedom to customize your desired combinations. But I guess Battle Network 1 wasn't any better when it came to its level up system. Though I do like how it fits thematically here, and thankfully, they do improve upon this system in the sequels. There are pros and cons from having more than 30 cards. On one hand, you've got more room to make mistakes since you're less susceptible to running out of attacks. But on the other hand, it also means there's less consistency if you're searching for a specific card. There's a clear shift in direction here. You still have to think of what battle cards you want to use at any given turn, but not in the same ways as you did in Battle Network. If BN tested your strategic efficiency, Starforce tests your dexterity. It certainly makes the early parts of the game less disruptive. Now you don't have to deal with the unreliable folders you start with. Yo, why did that rhyme? Bars, I guess? But as a result, it diminishes some of that complexity and depth seen in BN. It wasn't really hard to understand how the codes work, and you could argue that it limited potential combo routes, but I think it was a necessary rule so that it wouldn't make the game too unbalanced. By understanding it, the player would often get consistent combinations per turn. The wins you get always felt earned because of it. The depth came from the variety of attacks, the strategy behind them, and the possible combinations both in and out of battle. It was easy to learn, but when you also take into account other factors like positioning, chip properties, and enemy knowledge into account, that was something that was hard to master. It also just fit with the setting, with Megaman being a program and all. So what does Capcom do with all this? Okay boys, we did the exact same thing for 6 games. Let's change things up. They took out Todd Howard's book of Streamlining 101 and they got to work. Streamline the battlefields, streamline the battle chips, streamline the programs. The vision must be fulfilled. Jokes aside, I don't think streamlining is necessarily a bad thing. You can simplify something while still retaining the depth that made it compelling to the player. Alternatively, if you're going to remove or change a certain element, you should add another element that gives it a different kind of depth, in a manner that compels the player to actively learn and engage with the mechanics. Which, if you ask me, I think Capcom did a good job doing so here. We'll talk more about it when we reach the battle phase. With the removal of chip codes, program advances were also, by extension, eliminated. Until Starforce 3, that is. I want to say it was more like the developers couldn't figure out how to incorporate PAs with the new changes at the time of the game's development, or it was just a victim of the streamlining plan, hence why it was removed. But player feedback at the time convinced them to reincorporate it. I wasn't able to find information from the devs, so this is all conjecture, but I'm leaning towards the latter. Program advances were one of those elements that elevated your repertoire of attacks. It rewarded the player for their commitment to understand the codes and found ways to go beyond the limitations they bring. Without the codes to inhibit the player, it becomes easier to create decks, allowing for more freestyling builds, while also redirecting the player's time into focusing on the meat of the game. The combat. You're given free reign to go nuts and put any card you want, even if the cards don't necessarily synergize with each other. This also opens up possibilities. It gives you the keys to see what kind of combinations you can come up with. And the game even encourages this with the best combo card mechanic, which registers your highest damage combo and stores it in a single battle card. I've seen other people do like 1500 damage with these combo cards. It's pretty cool. Most of the attacks you've seen in Battle Network are here in some way, shape, or form. You got your cannons, your Vulcans, or Gatlings in this case, your swords, which is kind of strange they would put a close range attack when you can only move. Let's move on to the battle phase. The moment you start taking control of Mega Man, you realize that they made some changes to the Mega Buster. It now charges automatically, while holding down the shooting button makes it a rapid fire shot. It helps the player keep their full attention on the enemy's actions, which for a game that has a faster pace than Battle Network, I think it's a really neat change. In the game, you can find different types of busters that change its stats and properties in different ways. You can change the stats to accommodate to a more charged shot style of play, or if you're someone that likes to go guns blazing, you can prioritize the speed stat, turn it into something akin to a machine gun. You got busters that are focused on collecting battle cards and zennies and all that kind of stuff. It's very surface level stuff, but I think these small changes make the Buster a more useful weapon in comparison to Battle Network. Aside from the battle chips and the Buster, Megaman.exe doesn't really have other moves to use. I'm not counting the shield or parry programs, those are kind of add-ons, not really part of his default kit. Geo has more actions he can do in battle. For one, he has a shield. To compensate for our lack of space, we are given a shield. You see, there's some attacks that just straight up cannot be dodged. That's where the shield comes in. These types of attacks are given enough window of time to be reactable, even more so if you got the patterns down. With these changes to the forefront, it completely brings a whole different feel and flow to the combat. Battle Network played like a chess game. You know, you could take your time, you weren't really in much of a rush, and I mentioned it in my past video that it was structured like boxing. Well, Starforce tones down the chess aspect and takes the boxing part a couple of steps further, most of it applying to the way Megaman moves and attacks. I can't help but feel like the combat looks very similar to another game, where you punch people. Yeah, I'm talking about Punch-Out. Starforce is a more elaborate Punch-Out, and I can't unsee it now. Not every attack is blockable though. Any attack with the break attribute can completely go through it, so you have to pay close attention to the types of attacks heading your way. If you successfully block an attack, you can immediately act out of it, and because the enemies are still in their animations, it opens a small window of opportunity for your own counterattack. It's a technique skilled players can take advantage of if they're trying to go for fast deletions. It gives defensive options a bit more depth. You also have to be really careful not to mistime or spam the shield recklessly. It puts you in a recovery state that makes you vulnerable to attacks for a brief time. And speaking of counters, you also got the counter hit making its return. It fundamentally works similar to the last 3 Battle Network games, but with one major change. Because this game doesn't have an emotion status, instead of going into a full synchro state, you instead get rewarded with a battle card during the phase. While the card will come from your folder, it will also be random. There's a sense of satisfaction you can get from a successful counter hit. It can come from the sound effect you get after landing one, or the exhilarating opportunity to make a cool combo on the fly. The full synchros rewarded you with your next move dishing out heavy damage, but you have to be really careful not to use it at the wrong time or get hit while it's activated. Here it rewards you by giving you more actions and extending the flow of your combos without wasting any of your picked resources. Personally, while I did like the full synchros and found them to be incredibly satisfying, I do enjoy slightly more how the counter hit works here. I don't know, it's just the way you have to improvise and you're able to make combos on the fly that makes it cooler in my eyes. There is a way for you to get unique attacks, but we'll get to those later. With Megaman restricted to moving left and right, surely there has to be a way for us to use close range attacks effectively, right? Well, the Capcom gods descended from the heavens and threw Geo a bone. That bone being Omegasys, who also has what's known as a Mega Attack. Basically, you can lock onto a target and teleport in front of them to land a battle card attack. This mechanic makes almost every battle card useful in some way. It does take a bit to get used to though. You can use it with range attacks like cannons and bombs, although from personal experience, I find it better to just use those battle cards without the Mega Attack, since they can just cover the whole row and it's easier to react to attacks that way. This isn't a new mechanic per se, it's pretty much derived from the B-Style system in Battle Network 6, but it pretty much becomes a mainstay in the series. The Mega Attack feels pretty committal. You have to aim it properly to align it with the enemy, and if you mistime it, you can miss entirely or get hit mid-attack. It's not an automatic aimbot type of thing, you have to find the right timings to use it. Alternatively, you can try to use battle cards that can stun and combine them with close range attacks and get yourself a guaranteed hit. Also, it seems like the attack activations are slower when you use it. Like I went and checked to see the starting frames of the animation to see if that was the case, and it does seem like the teleportation delays the attack by a couple of frames. It almost feels like this is the trade-off you get for having the ability to attack the enemy directly. Side note, I really like how the camera gives us shots of the animations from different angles. It's one of the cool things we got from the change to 3D. Based on these changes and additions, it becomes a bit clearer in what direction they took for this game's combat system. Battle Network is mainly a strategy game that had action elements. Starforce does a complete 180. At its very core, it leans heavily on the fast-paced action combat, while still keeping some of the deck building from Battle Network. Strategy still plays a part in the gameplay, but the depth it had gets allocated to the action portion. This time, strategy alone might not be enough to win battles here. That reminds me of something that I've said in my Battle Network video. Mind refreshing my mind, past Delta?
While the action does play a big part of the experience, the design philosophy behind it makes it so having a good strategy can more than make up for the lack of mechanical skill. The developers themselves even highlighted this.
Well, you better start working on those reaction times if you want to play Starforce. Shit. I will say the bosses here are not super challenging by any means. Wanna have a challenge? Play Starforce DX on Legend mode. That'll put some hairs on your chest. So what does this all mean? It means the design philosophy here is centered around testing the player's reflexes. Hence, technical skill becomes an extremely important ability for the player to learn. The battle dynamic is completely different from its predecessor. You got these crazy attacks that can overwhelm you if you're not paying attention. You're forced to learn the rhythm of every fight so that you can find your openings. And that's how it tries to keep you engaged. I wouldn't be surprised if this was one of the reasons that led to the codes being removed. I feel like it would have added a superfluous element to a combat system focused on technical skill. It's not like it's not worth making strategies here. You can still do stuff like changing the battlefield to your benefit, and you can plan combos, but you have less control of the situations. There's less flexibility on how you plan and approach a battle. Positioning was a key component in combat. It made a lot of the interactions in Battle Network be determined by the chips you receive. You picked your chips, executed your plan, rinse and repeat. Learning the rhythm rewarded the player, but it wasn't an absolute requirement. With the right chips, you could make a lot of enemies fight on your terms, regardless of their gimmick. That was kind of the whole thing. You had different ways to problem solve. With the changes they made here, it's no longer focused on your strategy execution. Reactions and adaptation become the main attributes that determine your victory. You don't have your space control, you don't have your elaborate movement, you're always playing reactive, but never proactive. You're always playing at the enemy's tempo.
Not quite my tempo.
I do think this helps in building tension when gauging the risk and reward. You're not given the time to think, you now have to make those decisions on the spot. The new mechanics reflect that as well. They really wanted to make the battles more action focused. Personally, while I do find fun in Battle Network's intricacy, I've recently found myself enjoying Starforce's gameplay a lot more.
Well, hang on, you've just... No, I like it. This is brilliant, but I like this.
I'll admit, I'm a sucker for a good fast-paced action game, but back when I played Starforce, I never enjoyed it as much as I do now. Maybe it was because I didn't know any better. Even though I still enjoyed playing them, I was one of the kids that also thought that it was just a washed-down Battle Network game. But now I've got a newfound appreciation for them. If there's one thing Starforce does well, is maintaining the flow of combat. Since the battles tend to be fast by design, it really tries to get you into that flow state as soon as possible. Still, I can understand why some Battle Network fans wouldn't enjoy these changes. One of the things that made Battle Network so appealing was the slow and methodical approach it had. It genuinely made each battle feel like a puzzle. Starforce still has some of that Battle Network DNA, but the way you perceive attacks in this game feels different. Part of it is because of the major focus in these new mechanics, and that's okay. It tries to separate itself from the core that made Battle Network what it is, and does something fundamentally different. And to its credit, it does it really well, even if the first Starforce game is a little underdeveloped. But hey, the same could be said for the first Battle Network. We are not done though, because this is, at the end of the day, a Megaman game. And with Megaman games, you get new weapons and new forms, which Battle Network 1 did not have. So let's move on to the sequels. Battle Network has had various form changes over the course of its run, and they always offered variety and flexibility that made combat dynamic, such as being able to combine a certain style with an elemental affinity, and you can mix and match between them. This is without taking into account how grindy it can be, but let's forget about that for now. They had elements that distinguished them from each other, which in turn gave the player another layer to experiment with. But Starforce 1 takes a very different approach. 3 versions, 3 forms, and they only give you access to one through normal playthrough. You can still get the other forms through the Brother Band system, but that'll require you to have friends play the other versions. Well, that's assuming you have friends, that is. Yeah, like Capcom was not cooking, bro. What do you mean they made 3 versions of this game?
What?
I'm getting distracted. First off, you got Fire Leo, a fire element form. There's Ice Pegasus, an aqua element form, and Green Dragon, a wood element form. These forms change your buster weapons in a similar way Battle Network did with their forms, changing their charge shots to special attacks pertaining to their respective element. You're also given the ability Side Select, which allows you to select battle cards horizontally, which should have been a default ability already, but that's just me. In addition, countering an enemy will result in Mega Man drawing what's called a Starforce Big Bang. Very on the nose there with the space theme. It's a unique Giga Card class attack that can only be obtained through counter hits. Say you counter hit 3 times that turn, you're gonna get rewarded with 3 Giga Cards, which is crazy. If you're not intrinsically motivated to get better, then you have this as a good extrinsic motivator. The main problem with these forms, aside from the exclusivity, is that there's no sense of individuality between them. They all carry the same abilities, they don't give you unique effects aside from your element and buster weapon, with the exception of the Green Dragon form, which for some reason this form has an additional ability with Status Guard. Aside from the Side Select ability, the forms don't really add any substantial changes to the combat. It's here where the lack of depth is very noticeable. Starforce 2 has the tribe system, which does improve upon the form changes by giving each form unique abilities, and even able to combine them to make one of the most broken forms seen in the series, the Tribe King. Still, when compared to the Battle Network games, it didn't fully fix the lack of player agency. The next title, however, would fix this issue and go above and beyond, as they would add a couple of new features that really pushed the combat system to new heights. Starforce 3. It's the byproduct of the best parts of the creative mind. The sugar, spice, and everything nice. The elite of the elite. Since the very birth of the universe, every invention, every step in the name of progress, it all peaked here at the very moment Starforce 3 was made. Okay, jokes aside, this game is so good. It completely perfects the combat system in the same vein that Battle Network 6 perfected it in its own series. Capcom took everything that they've learned, and I mean everything, all of the lessons and experiences that they had making Battle Network and Starforce coming together to create what could arguably be a top 3 Mega Man game of all time. Because this game had so much depth to its combat system. They brought back the program advances, now renamed as Galaxy Advances. They also overhauled the custom screen. You now have the side select ability by default. Finally! Cards are still aligned in a 3x2 grid, but now they can overlap. The cards in the forefront can be selected normally, but the cards in the background go by different rules. You can either select it as the only card you can use for the turn, or you can convert it to a support card. If you remove the card that overlapped with the support card, the next turn, that support card will turn into your standard attack. Support cards here give you a lot more control over the battlefield. It may seem like a small change, but it completely changes the way you think when you're picking battle cards. This introduces a new layer of strategy, contrasting with prior games where card selection was often straightforward. Players are now challenged to decide if a support card's current benefit outweighs the option of saving it for a normal attack in the next turn. The card's exact position becomes a variable players need to consider. For instance, a card in the top center could be positioned too much to the right, which could lead to an overlap with the card on the top right. Depending on your strategy, you might choose to play the card on the forefront and save the support card for regular use in the next turn, or you could utilize the support card for an alternative strategy, or just to create space for subsequent turns. There's a lot more player expression going on this time. It's a very welcome change that gives the game complexity and new ways for the player to approach battles. But all of this pales in comparison to the implementation of one new mechanic that completely spices things up, the noise system. And with it, a shit ton of new forms and combinations to play around with, each with their own strengths and weaknesses, but distinguished in their own different ways. Don't misunderstand though, the game is still heavily action-packed. That's just not gonna change, it's part of its design choice. But it fixes the problem the first, and to some extent the second game had, with its form changes. It individualizes the player's experience. You're still incentivized to play aggressive, but now it gives you different ways to do so, and as a result, gives you more room for experimentation. And it does so without compromising the combat's direction. And they take it a step further with the addition of multi-noise, which lets you combine the abilities of your current noise form with that of your brother bands. Another feature that is locked behind having friends. They're very similar to the style changes from Battle Network 2 and 3, but in my opinion, it kind of does it better than the style changes. For the record, there are 100 different forms you can take. This is mostly due to the multi-noise, but it's something I thought it was worth mentioning because that's a lot of forms. And then you have finalization, which is similar to the Beast Out, but certain requirements are needed to activate it. It's a way to motivate you to learn the intricacies of the battle system, because when you get good at it, you get access to a really good set of battle cards, and you get these sick-ass forms. You're as beautiful as the day I lost you. Also, did I forget to mention that if you use the noise system properly, you can pierce through invisible opponents? Yeah, the game removes the weights of restriction and lets you go crazy if you've mastered the combat mechanics. It adds another layer of depth to the combat, expanding on combo routes that would otherwise not be possible. I always felt there was something missing in the first game, like it didn't have that explosive combo game the Battle Network games had, and this game rectifies it. Usually by hitting the enemy with certain battle cards, it would put them in this invisible and vulnerable state where it communicates to the player that their sequence of attacks is over. So they have to wait a bit of time before they get get their chance to attack again. By getting the noise gauge up to 100%, your battle cards can pierce through that invisibility, giving the player the ability to continue their onslaught with the only limitation being running out of cards for that turn. It helps perpetuate the fast-paced action it's trying to achieve by rewarding the player for their skill. It's like the game is telling the player, oh, you think you're good? Let's see how far you can take it. It's one of my favorite parts about this game. It really respects the player's ability to grow and make full use of these abilities. The addition of these mechanics makes Starforce 3 the perfect combination of elements that just work well together, giving the series its own unique identity while arguably reaching the same depth the Battle Network games reached. The Starforce series has undergone a notable evolution throughout its run, transitioning from a relatively simple deck-building action game to one with increasingly complex and mechanically engaging gameplay. It was able to take that familiar framework and restructure it to something distinct and interesting, which makes the series' failure much more tragic because Capcom really wanted it to live up to the success of Battle Network. But at the point of Starforce 3's release, it was too little too late, as the Megaman burnout was at full effect, and with how beloved Battle Network was, some fans were just not receptive to the new changes. It also didn't help that people never gave this series a fair chance and just wrote it off as just another Mega Man RPG. Comparisons are going to be inevitable, and people have their own preferences. Just like how some Mega Man fans dislike the Battle Network series and prefer the action platformers, there are some that just prefer Battle Network over Starforce and vice versa. For me personally, this take on the combat system still has a lot of depth and interesting ideas that really make it stand out, and most importantly, makes it fun to play. I like how the new mechanics work. They just make landing hits and executing combos so satisfying to me. In the end, I still urge any new Mega Man fans to try out the Starforce series. With the Legacy Collection out, now is the best time to give them a shot. There's a lot of love and care that went into these games, and they are severely underappreciated. Thank you guys so much for watching till the end. This one was probably the most stressful one I've made so far, mostly because I just wasn't happy with certain parts of the script and I just ended up rewriting a lot of parts. But yeah, if you guys enjoyed it, please leave a like, leave a comment. What do you guys think of the Starforce combat? What do you guys think of the Legacy Collection? What do you guys like about Starforce? Like, just tell me your opinions about Starforce in general. I like reading those. And if you guys want to see more Starforce content, which I will be making more videos on Starforce soon, subscribe to the channel. And also the memberships are there if you guys want to go the extra mile to support the channel. But yeah, that about wraps up the video. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, drink lots of water, and I'll see y'all on the next one. Peace out.